This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome, everybody, to the November 3rd meeting of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners. I'd ask before we get things started, Randy, if you could do a roll call to see who's present this evening.
Sure. Commissioner Walk.
Here.
Commissioner Long.
Here.
Commissioner Seton. Here. Commissioner Kelly.
Here.
Commissioner Morgan.
Here. Everybody's here. Next, I'd ask if everybody would please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'd like to note that all public sessions of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners are electronically recorded, filed, and posted on board docs for the public's access. I'd also like to note that the board did meet in executive session this evening, right prior to this public meeting, to get legal advice on a variety of matters and also land acquisition. With that being said, Randy, could you read over the virtual rules this evening?
Sure. They have changed a little bit. We've, as staff, we've been updating these to bring us a little bit more in line with what we're currently doing in terms of our hybrid system here, being virtual and in person. So I'm going to let Dave touch on, some exciting news here shortly, but for the individuals on GoToMeeting, hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. If you would like to comment via GoToMeeting, simply type your name and address into the chat, followed by your question or comment. The commentator, Dave, will read your question aloud to the board. So Dave's just going to touch real quick, 30 seconds on some of the updates we've made in hopefulness to solve our audio concerns.
So what we've done is we now have the bridge that takes the feed from the speakers and the camera feed, and it goes directly into GoToMeeting. So what GoToMeeting is hearing is what's going through the microphones. So it's very important that you speak clearly into the microphones so that it's picked up on GoToMeeting. That's kind of the first step. Now that we have this bridge, we can start implementing some of the virtual meeting stuff that we had talked about previously. So this is kind of the first step, and look for more interactions and virtual meeting stuff to start happening. So it's kind of exciting, and I'm stressing a little bit, but.
Don't stress, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And before we get things started tonight, I just wanted to send out a huge congratulations to all the candidates who were successful yesterday during the election. We have a new set of Board of Commissioners coming in January. Congratulations to all of them. And also a vote of gratitude to the people who didn't make it for their willingness to want to serve the community, and hope that they continue with that drive to want to serve the community. So big congratulations. I know we have some people in the audience tonight, so great job. All right. So to get things started this evening, we will start off with our presentations. And first on our presentations is with Herbine and Company. It will be presentation of our 2020 audit. Welcome.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. I will say this is a lot nicer than holding the
It sure is.
microphone in front of my face. So good to see some upgrades in the township. I did send my presentation ahead of time to be able to put on a big screen, and each one of you in front of you do have a landscape document, and I'm going to be working from that this evening. So my name is Chris Tortel, the partner from Herbine and Company, going over the 2020 audit for the township. We're going to go over a brief introduction. We'll review the auditor's report for the year ended December 31st, 2020, some financial highlights and trends, and then some other auditor communications. A reminder, we do a financial audit here at the township. We audit under generally accepted auditing standards, and our responsibility is to give an opinion on the financial statements and whether they are materially correct in conformity with GAAP, United States Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. So the reporting entity here, just to remind everyone, we do take the municipal authority, which is the water and the sewer, and it does get blended right into the township report. So the township does have a complete statement that does include the water and the sewer authority. And we do rely on some specialists to help us with certain calculations. The township uses Conrad Siegel for their pension liability calculation and also other post-employment benefits, which would be any health insurance or other benefits other than pension for retirees. We have an unmodified opinion, clean audit opinion out here. It's the highest opinion you can get from an independent auditor. So clean audit report, unmodified audit opinion for the township. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just to recap where we ended up for the general fund for 2020. I'm on page 6 of the document. You'll see a comparative 2019 to 2020. A couple of items to point out. So the first item to point out here, when we look at year over year, is other taxes. Second line down, you'll see 9,362,000 in the prior year, and it dropped down to 7,702,000 in the current year. Embedded in that number is your emissions tax. That's your amusement tax. Amusement tax in 2019 was a little less than 1.7 million. In 2020, it was 155,000. So that was all Dorney Park being closed. Remember, we have to think back pandemic times. So that represents almost all of the drop in that line item. Small uptick in transfer taxes in 2020, about $100,000 to offset a little bit, but that was the majority of that drop. One other item to note is under intergovernmental revenue, which is the third line up from the orange bar for revenues, 922, this year, $1,244,000. That's the $325,000 of COVID money. That was coronavirus relief money that came from the county of Lehigh. That was received in 2020. So that represents the increase in our intergovernmental revenue. So overall, revenue decreased from $19,500,000 to $17,870,000 from 2019 to 2020. I'm going to touch on that again in a minute. We move down to the next orange bar, total expenditures. Total expenditures, $17,500,000, decreased down to $16,124,000, as most municipalities did and most governments did. When COVID started in March, you tightened your belts. You started moving back on capital projects. You started looking at supply purchases and making sure you were only doing projects that needed to be done, and also realizing you couldn't get certain projects done based upon that COVID environment. Certain items, some overtime, some other factors also dropped down. It was actually a pretty mild winter if we have to think back to 2020. But overall, this also generated those savings on the expenditure side of the ledger. Transfers out, $794,000, which is just above that third orange bar, represents the transfers over to capital reserve. And you'll see the first green bar then, net change in fund balance. We had a $58,690 loss in the general fund in 19, a $996,000 surplus in the general fund in 2020. The bottom half of the table represents your fund balance. Total fund balance on the bottom right-hand side, $7,810,023. Of that, $6,816,000 is unassigned, meaning that is your actual reserve. It does include fiscal stability, and Mr. Walk will enjoy. I changed the graph here in a couple of minutes that will give you a nice breakdown of that number. But overall, the township's in a very healthy position. $7,810,000 is your fund balance. When we look at expenditures of $16,124,000, you can see as a percentage, the township has a nice stable reserve base at the end of 2020. I'm more of a visual learner. Part of what I like to do here is also on the education side. I thought this was a really interesting thing to see. Here's our general fund tax revenue. So we talked about those different buckets: real estate, earned income tax, business privilege, amusement, transfer, and local service taxes. Taxes make up about 80% of the revenue in the general fund. Here you can clearly see our amusement tax, which is just towards the middle, 17, 18, 19, dropped down in 20. So what that does, it just makes everything else that much more important. So all of a sudden, real estate taxes go from 30% of our budget to almost 45% of our budget to cover expenditures, and so on and so forth. So losing about 10% of your revenue stream is a pretty significant hit when you think about that emissions drop. On the expenditure side, we did go back and reallocate what it would have looked like if the MMO, we talked about that, the minimum municipal obligation. The township used to record the pension obligation payment all under general government. And we had suggested when we came out and did the audit last time that it really should be broken down by police, public works, give a more accurate depiction of what it actually costs to run those departments. We went back and recast and said, what would it have been if it would have been properly done, or at least not properly done, not that it was improperly done, better done for those years. You can see as a percentage, which is the bottom half of the chart, I like the percentages better, gives you a better idea of where the trend is. Police department runs anywhere between 35 upwards of about 40% of the total budget of the township. Pretty common, that's about where we would expect it to be. But in the past, that was showing more of a 30% number, kind of understating what it actually costs to have that public safety department. Nothing jumps out here tremendously in any respects, but it's always good to just kind of see that trend and where you are. And lastly, on the fund balance side, so when we met with the finance committee, we had the dark blue bar, which kind of showed where the total reserve was. And we talked about a total reserve for the township being a little over 40% of your unassigned fund balance over next year's budgeted expenditures. I added a green and yellow bar to say, the green bar is how much of that's coming from the general fund, and the yellow bar is saying how much of that's in my fiscal stability fund. So the fiscal stability fund is maintaining just about a 20% reserve, and that's kind of leveled off in 18, 19, 20. See that yellow bar kind of curves right up against that blue bar there. So factoring in that we recommend at least a 20% reserve, your fiscal stability fund itself is giving you that reserve that you want to have. The general fund then is also adding to that reserve almost another 20% at the end of 2020. And that's how we're coming up to that 40% total. So this way it just gives you that breakdown. I know when you budget, when you're thinking, you think of the two funds separately. Hopefully this just gives you a little more clarity. A couple of the funds out here at the township, we have a fire tax, state highway aid, and open space. Open space is a new fund this year. The township's always had open space money. It was just recorded in the escrow funds. This is a more transparent depiction here to show open space monies coming in from developers. We'll see 560,000 total on the right-hand side. And then 437 that went out, mostly for the Covered Bridge project and the Jordan Creek Greenway. Those were the two big projects coming out of that open space fund. Lastly, capital projects. So I have a comparative 1920. Capital projects does combine your capital reserve and also the campus renovation fund. The top half will show all of our activity for the year. You'll see general government, which is, if you look at the orange bar for total revenues, the next number down on the right-hand side, 8,650,795. That is the cost of the campus renovation project through December of 2020. The remainder of those costs, the 500, 123, 317, those are all capital reserve costs. So this is your normal capital expenditures that happen during the year. Overall, at the end of 2020, not sure if you can scroll down a little bit. There we go. On the bottom right-hand side, you'll see a 125,000 in assigned and 384 in restricted. The 125 in assigned represents how much you have left in capital reserve transfer. You transfer money over from the general fund, you purchase capital assets, that money is assigned then for future capital purchases still. The 384 represents the bond proceeds that were still outstanding at the end of the year. Those bond proceeds are then restricted for a certain purpose. More flexibility with the 125 because you assigned it there. The 384 is restricted by the debt. Lastly, we have three proprietary funds out here. We have water, sewer, and refuse. Again, water and sewer are taking the authority and moving an allocation of the pension liability over water and sewer. We use township employees for our water and sewer. Therefore, a portion of that pension liability gets allocated to those departments. First green bar just shows our positive change in that position for water and sewer. 881 surplus in water this year, 700,000 surplus in sewer. There was a deficit in refuse. Refuse was an interesting year. Refuse, we saw an increase in rates for refuse and also an increase in fees on the refuse side. We're going to see that on the next chart. But overall here, when we look at the net position, that's that bottom green bar. It's important to look one line above that. The 10,359,000 for water is a little misleading as a reserve because 7.7 million of that represents capital assets and debt. Can't spend capital assets and debt. Your actual reserve is about $2.6 million in water. Same thing for sewer, about 4.9, and a little over 200,000 in refuse. And just quickly here, you'll see what I was mentioning on the refuse side. You see that increase in fees that happened and also the increase in rate of the contractor for the service. Refuse has been, especially recycling, has been very challenging right now for contractors and costs of recycling. We see that common theme in most of our municipalities. I'm going to move through the next slide, just talking about the pension fund. Randy, you can go 2 more slides down. 1 more. Looking at the pension fund as a percentage of your funding status. So we have 3 pension funds out here at South Whitehall. We have our police, public works, and our office workers fund. All 3 are over 80% funded as of December 31st, 2020, according to our GASB 87 calculation from Conrad Siegel. So you can see where those plans were in 18, down underneath 65 in some cases here for public works, have grown tremendously. Market's done well. And we're seeing those returns and looking at those funding statuses in the 80% range. So very healthy on the pension plan fund, which is very important, obviously, as you know here. And that helps pay dividends when you look at MMOs, your municipal obligation going forward. The healthier your plan, the more controlled those obligations become. Any questions on the financials? I know it's a lot of information. I know we spent a lot of time going over it. Next couple of slides are just when we look and we look for internal control deficiencies in the job that we do. So when we were going through our audit process and we're gaining our understanding of internal controls, if during our process we saw opportunities or we saw deficiencies in internal controls, our job is then to report them to governance. We don't plan our audit to find internal controls. That's not what we're planning to do. We do a financial audit, but when we find control deficiencies, we present them to you. 2 types of deficiencies we're going to talk about: material weaknesses and significant deficiencies. Material weaknesses are a situation where a control needs to be improved, where a control may or may not have been in place to detect something from occurring. A significant deficiency is a control that needs to be enhanced. There may have been a control, but it just wasn't operating as it was designed to operate. To remind everyone, we were just here in August. Well, I was just here in August. It may feel like a long time ago, and August was a great moment, right? August was a good moment for the township, getting up to date, 16, 17, 18, and 19 audits. And I'm very happy to be here in November doing the 2020 audit. As I told Mr. Walk in our finance committee meeting, I still have a township that didn't finish 2020, so you're not the last one. But we still have many of the same issues that we had through 17, 18, and 19. We're still in 2020. You know, we worked hard with Scott and his team, but a lot of that work didn't take place till 2021. And really the work of making a difference, I would say. Corrections were made along the way. And I want to give credit where credit's due that, you know, not every material weakness or significant deficiency from year to year is created equally. However, we still had several account reconciliations that just were not done timely. And that included cash, accounts receivable, capital assets, pretty significant items that the finance team spent a lot of 2021 trying to catch up and get to the point where we could perform an audit. And those account reconciliations led to material adjustments. The material adjustment means when we get the financial statement out of the trial balance out of the system, the end product needed to be adjusted materially, significantly, to get to that end number. And I know we've talked about, you know, what does that mean? The detriment to that being that there are times when you're receiving quarterly reports or monthly reports where those numbers are coming out of the system, and if things aren't being reconciled, there's opportunity for those reports not to be as accurate as they could have been. We've made a lot of progress on the cashier checks. I always hate harping on something we already checked on and we talked about. This was really more of a 2021 event that we detected and worked with Scott and his team to rectify. So you're not going to see a lot of change from 19 to 20. But I can tell you there's been a lot of change in the last 6 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever it's been since the last time we met. Because as soon as it was detected that these checks were on hand, they were secured and most of them were deposited and tried to be rectified where they need to go. So steps have been taken. But from a material weakness standpoint, there obviously wasn't a control to stop that from happening in the first place. There's significant deficiencies, a level below a material weakness. Pension matters, there's a few items. This is actually the Auditor General's office from the state detected a couple of items. Nothing that rose to a level of material weakness for me. We're talking in November, so you realize that the audit wasn't filed in April. Escrow tracking has gotten better. We're continuing to bill more timely. This was evidenced when we look at collections. So there's a principle in accounting that if you have bills outstanding for more than 60 days after year end that haven't been collected, you're not allowed to recognize them as revenue in the current year. And that number decreased in 2020, meaning to me, I'm looking that you're billing and collecting more timely on escrows. Accounts receivable tracking. The audit for 2020 went a lot smoother than the other years. And the simple fact of that was that a time-sensitive report for accounts receivable, the money owed to the township for water, sewer, refuse, and other general billings, was run on December 31st. So having that report on hand, it's a lot easier to audit instead of having to recreate from billing ledgers and collection reports. So a significant step forward. Our recommendation here, and the reason we have it as a deficiency, is that the report needs to be cleaned up. There's still some outstanding items from Lehigh County that was already settled with some of the extra strength billings that were already cleaned up in the past that need to be cleaned up on the report to make it more useful. So when you run the report, you're not deducting 6 line items to try to get to where the total is. You can just look at the total. The one new item this year was reimbursements for the capital renovation expenditures. During our audit, the one item we noticed is that there were transfers that were made between the water fund, the sewer fund, the fiscal stability fund into the general fund. And part of the issue that we identified is that these transfers weren't necessarily recorded on the general ledger. They moved into cash, didn't move in the actual account. If I go back to number 1, account reconciliations, if we would have reconciled bank account, we wouldn't have noticed this, right? So bank accounts not being reconciled, didn't detect this either. Concern was more so in the standpoint that the township was moving money to pay bills for the campus renovation project when we had a loan for that project that we just hadn't drawn down on. And so it became more of a cash management issue when I look at it. The township did draw about $5 million from that loan at the end of 2020. And it was still significant, obviously left over. We're talking about $8 million in expenditures that happened in 2020. We only drew down about $5 million, a little over $5 million in cash at the end of 2020. So our concern became, 1, why do we have transfers that weren't recorded within the system? And 2, is there a reason that we took out a note and we didn't actually draw down the funds as the bills were being paid? We talked in the finance committee. Normally how this works is the bank generally requires you to submit the construction invoices to the bank for approval, and then the bank will then release the funds to you to pay the invoice. If done seamlessly, the cash out of pocket for the municipality is very minimal because you're actually using then the debt funds to pay the bills. There are times where you get reimbursed. That definitely happens. Timing, it's a lot easier to transfer money from one account to another to pay a bill than it is to necessarily get it from the debt instrument. Our concern was just that all this money had moved when the debt instrument was available to be used. And then it didn't move back until we kind of unwound where all these transfers took place. So trying to work to make sure, identifying in the future, how do we identify when transfers happen and making sure that we're tracking everything more timely and properly. It was discovered that, there was somebody in the business office who had tracked a lot of this in an Excel spreadsheet off the ledger. And that leads to one of our other comments, which is we got to stop tracking things off the ledger. The escrow accounts were another thing that were being tracked off the ledger. And when I say off the ledger, not through the accounting system. So when you track things off the accounting system, it just makes it more difficult for everybody to get their hands around what's out there. Lastly, some other internal control, just other items, reporting, liquid fuels reporting, just make sure we're doing that timely and accurately. There's a couple of reconciling items that need to be put in there. I know the board was working on a fund balance policy, and I know there's also a movement looking at internal controls and standard operating procedures. Lastly, from a required communication standpoint, difficulties performing the audit. Obviously, these reconciliations not performed timely did delay us getting the audit done. A lot of proposed adjustments, including some material in nature. And it was a past adjustment this year, meaning a proposed adjustment that wasn't made. Bank account reconciliation was off by an immaterial amount. according to our audit standards. So it was a proposed adjustment that management passed on making. We implemented a new standard this year for GASB 84. The only real change you're going to see there is on the pension plans. There used to be 5 pension plans included in the back of the report. Now there's only 3, the 3 defined benefit plans, because those are really the 3 plans that the township has fiduciary responsibility for. The defined contribution plans are tracked by the members. That's their responsibility. And key estimates are allowance for doubtful accounts, capital asset lives, the funding status of the pension plans, and the other post-employment benefit plan. That's it. It's a couple of new standards. I'm not going to go through new accounting standards tonight, but I will entertain any questions at this point in time.
Thank you, Chris. I want to thank Scott for it and yourself and Megan Thompson for completing the 2020 audit. The full board appreciates all your hard work in completing these last 5 years of audits. It's excellent news that the fund balance has increased from an already good 35% to 40%. And in part, I think you said it, but in part, it's due to the department managers and the staff's efforts to reduce costs to offset the decrease in Dorney Park revenue during the pandemic. I really appreciate you highlighting that 2020 had this one extra finding compared to 2016 through 19. And I thank you for explaining it so eloquently, so I don't have to read the paragraph you wrote in the letter you sent to us. I'd just like to add a few things to what you said, because to me, this is sort of you explained all the accounting issues. And I think these are the implications to the township and for us as a board, considering what you found. We took out a campus renovation loan, and then for the most part, we didn't use it until the very end. We used operating funds, and that required all these fund transfers. There's no detailed information available about why the campus renovation loan funds weren't used and why the other operating funds were used to pay the invoices. Maybe that's beyond the scope of, the detailed accounting audit. But in my mind, this audit on that cash management issue, it does warrant further review to try to understand why that occurred. I think we need to determine the root causes, why it happened, and try to find corrective actions to prevent it from happening in the future. And just one more thing at a higher level, we've talked about this in this board meeting quite often. The board has the authority to approve our township finances, and we need to be informed in order to do that, including informed about these interfund loans that occurred. And that didn't happen in this case. I look at it as the bottom line is we took out a bank loan for the campus renovation. We didn't use it in a timely manner. And instead we used these operating funds to pay the invoices, and the board wasn't informed that that's what was happening. So the board and the staff need to work together to correct this type of problem. I mean, basically to afford the flow of the correct and timely information to the board so we know what's going on with the township finances. Thank you again. I can't say enough about what Herbine and Chris Turtell and Megan Thompson have done right along with Scott.
Any other questions?
So overall, Chris, and I'm trying to use the right wording,
Sure.
the audit remained unqualified.
Yes, unmodified. So clean audit opinion.
Clean audit. All right, that's awesome. Certainly, and thank you for outlining some of the weaknesses and areas for improvement. I think that's awesome. It shows us where we can be better. But I think most importantly, like you mentioned, it's a clean audit. We ended up in a good place, and I'm very proud of staff for getting us there and for your support along the way. So thank you for all you've done. Thank you, Scott, and thank you to the entire team, Randy, and the entire executive team. I know everybody's done a real fine job on that.
And just to echo your comments quickly, the 2020 audit also, that process went a lot smoother than before. So I do want to give credit to your staff for making that
Great.
process a lot
Thank you.
easier to get through and work through. So they've been a pleasure to work with. They're very responsive. And to put one more perspective in here, I do want to congratulate the township on achieving such a very, very good bond rating. And that bond rating comes from, good financial practices in the past, and also being able to have a staff that we turned around the 2020 audit quickly, with the help of Scott and his team working overtime to get that done, be able to get that information to Moody's to help that along. So I just want to give credit to the township for, congratulations on getting such a good favorable bond rating also.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Much appreciated. All right, any other questions from the board?
I just have one, just to follow up on what Commissioner Wolk spoke of regarding the building renovation loan and the transfers that went on last year. So it sounds like it was $5 million throughout the year that was transferred
$5 million was what was drawn down from the loan at the end of the
from
year.
the loan at the end of the
The
year,
transfers that we noted were
1.86.
1.86. So that's a significant amount of money that was drawn
Correct.
from our fiscal stability funds of water, sewer, refuse, and
correct.
potentially the general fund. And I wanted to just,
Yeah, I can't quantify how much general fund was spent. That was just the transfers from the other.
okay. I noted in one of your notes on the audit, under stewardship, compliance, and accountability, you talked here about the proposed budget, and the statement that's written here says all modifications, transfers, and amendments must be approved by the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners may authorize supplemental appropriations during the year and must approve all over expenditures of appropriations or transfers of appropriated amounts. So I thank you for clarifying that for us as a identified item that we can use moving forward. I certainly was concerned, as I expressed to you in our
Sure.
meeting, when this was made public to us in the Finance Committee, because I certainly do review all of the invoices and everything that comes in our packet. We meet monthly for finance meetings, and I wasn't aware of any of this, and it's alarming to think that all those transfers were done without the board's knowledge. So I think this board needs to have a conversation, and certainly one of the suggestions that you made to us, which I hope that we can adopt, is to list any transfers in our board packet twice a month so that we are aware. This could have been rectified month number one. If we knew that transfers were being made, we would have asked questions, and I think it's a good safeguard, and I thank you for that recommendation.
And I would just, when we had talked about this, to remind, there are transfers that happen all the time, right? So you have a lot of inter-fund activity that happens. You have employees that work in water and sewer. You pay bills out of one fund. So there are a lot of transfers that just take place, cash transfers that take place. But I think it's good to quantify for your sake to say what's the difference between a normal operating cash transfer and what's atypical in a cash transfer. Because we even mentioned there's some funds like the fire tax fund, for instance, where fire tax revenue doesn't really come in the first 2 months of the year because you're coming through property taxes. So there may be an opportunity there where the general fund has to loan the fire tax fund some money. And I don't think the problem necessarily with that, there is a problem with that, but it's more so you're looking at it from a, just to be informed, to say, okay, and maybe that's a situation where the fire tax fund needs to build a little bit more of a fund balance so that they don't have to borrow money from the general fund to operate. Maybe it's a reserve thing then, and you look at that. And I'm just using the fire tax fund as an example, but just to remind you that there are transfers that do happen all the time. But I do see your point, especially the atypical transfers. Yes.
Correct. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'll just say one more thing. because Commissioner Kelly and I are on a finance committee, we have been probably the two in greatest pursuit of financial information. And on this campus renovation project, at these meetings, I've continually asked for the campus renovation cost report. What's the cost forecast? And it was very difficult to obtain that report with, detailed information. Scott actually finally, in my mind, produced the report that includes the necessary detailed information when he came on board. And so that's approaching it from the project management standpoint. And Commissioner Kelly has done an extremely arduous job in reviewing the invoices and, asking questions about the invoices. I would think that with my questions about the campus renovation project and with Commissioner Kelly's questions about all the invoices, including that project, somewhere in there, the information would have flowed to the board of what's going on with the loan and what's going on with these transfers. So that's just my opinion of what happened here in hindsight.
And I just going to mention you said about the cost side. The costs were, in our audit of the costs were properly recorded in the campus renovation fund.
Yeah, good.
So this was definitely more of a cash management side than an actual expenditures not being recorded properly.
All
And
right.
that goes along with Ms. Kelly's thoughts of you saw the expenditures being done. So
Yeah.
right.
Any other
Nope.
questions from the board? Any from the public? Any in the chat?
Sorry, nobody sees my picture.
Dave, you have to speak into the microphone.
I'll just close by saying thank you for letting us be a part of this, and it's been a long journey, and I'm glad to finally be at this point with all of you and to be able to wrap this up. So
Long journey with a good outcome.
long journey with a good outcome.
And thank you for your dedication and work with our staff. And thank you to the Scott and team for everything you've done as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Any questions, Dave?
The chat is now open if anybody would like to comment. Nothing in the chat.
Nothing in the chat. All right. So thank you again for that. So at this point then, I'm going to shift down on our agenda a little bit to keep an order of the topics. So with that being said, do I hear a motion to accept the 2020 audit as presented this evening?
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Walk. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Walk,
Aye.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Seton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Aye.
and Commissioner Morgan.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, everybody. All right. Next this evening, we have no ordinances for discussion. However, we have a variety of resolutions for consideration and possible action. The first is a resolution amending resolution number 2019-47 to permit security draws presentation further than 60 miles from the township's office for a major plan entitled 4741 Chapman's Road Flex Warehouse Facility 2019. Mr. Manhart, would you like to start off?
I will certainly start off. This is for the project located at 4741 Chapman's Road, the roughly 100,000 square foot warehouse. They were granted approval in 2019. They were last before the board in, I believe it was May 2021, asking for the same request, permission to draw further than 60 miles away. At that time, it was Hartford, Connecticut. Now they are looking for I guess, a new bank, and the applicant can explain the rationale for that. And staff has no objections, frankly, because it's in Tampa as opposed to Connecticut. I'll leave with that. I'll leave it to the applicant.
Who's actually with the engineering firm representing the applicant is here, but if Kevin doesn't mind, I'll explain it a little bit more. I've had conversations with the administrative staff at the developer's office. My understanding in speaking with them is that they are changing banks from Webster Bank to JP Morgan Chase Bank, just as a financial decision. I have reviewed the letter of credit that JP Morgan Chase Bank is looking to provide to us, and I have no further comments. There were some minor changes which they agreed to make, and I believe, Greg, they might have overnighted it to the township today, so hopefully it has arrived. But essentially, the coverage of the securities remains the same, so nothing is changing. It's just a new bank, exactly. The number is exactly the same. They've not at this point requested any reductions in the security, but because we do have in our resolution a requirement that the banks be located within 60 miles of the municipal building, we do require the developer agree that in the event a draw is required, that the payment of a staff person going to physically appear before the bank to get the draw is covered, whether it's flights, whatever travel expenses may be. And the applicant has agreed to do that. They have executed the acceptance of the conditions of the new resolution, and they have also provided us a signed copy of the amendment to the security agreement, which we have to record in accordance with our SALDO ordinance. Thank you, Lisa. Are there any questions regarding this resolution, amending resolution from the board? Any from the public? Any in the chat? Nothing in the chat. All right. Very good. With that being said, do I hear a motion to move forward with a resolution amending the security draws process and banks for 4741 Chapman's Road Flex Warehouse 2019? We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Seton. Have a roll call vote, please, Randy.
Sure. Commissioner Walk,
Aye.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Seton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Aye.
and Commissioner Morgan.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Dave? All right, next this evening for consideration and possible action, we have a resolution granting preliminary approval to a major plan entitled Ridge Farm. Dave, would you like to introduce this topic?
Yes, so this is the applicant's looking for preliminary plan approval. Typically, we see preliminary final plan approval. So this is the first step in that process. There will be additional final plans that come through. Joe, I don't know if I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there any clarification so that the board and the public's aware of what's involved with a preliminary plan and what rights are involved with that and what could potentially changes that could occur at the final plan?
Sure, I'd be glad to touch on that. The distinction between a preliminary plan and a final plan is grounded in the municipality's planning code, the MPC, which at a high level is essentially the guidebook, the Bible on how development works throughout Pennsylvania. The biggest distinction between a preliminary plan and final plan is the level of detail. There's more detail in a final plan than there is in a preliminary plan. And every municipality has the right to decide what level of detail goes into each. And that's set forth in the subdivision and land development ordinance of each municipality. And of course, South Whitehall has its own SALDO, its ordinance that dictates that. And with a project of any magnitude, and of course, Ridge Farm is of very significant magnitude, There's a great deal of engineering that goes into even the preliminary plan, but there is additional engineering work that goes into the final plan that's not part of the preliminary plan. And one thing that does come out of, at least philosophically, and I think pragmatically from the township staff review and a township engineer review with a preliminary plan, is that there's an assurance that the project will work at that location. The layout works under the township ordinances. Now, at that point in time, it'd be exceedingly rare to have outside agency approvals, such as PennDOT, such as Department of Environmental Protection, such as Army Corps of Engineers, whoever is involved in it, almost never going to have that level of approval from outside agencies. And of course, outside agency approvals could impact the site plan, the development plan as it works through the process. With some projects, usually the smaller projects, it's not uncommon for a developer to make a submission that's a preliminary / final plan application. And it goes through the process as one. But with a larger project, that's usually not done, and that's what we're seeing here. There are some ramifications that accrue with respect to a preliminary plan, and I'll just touch on those. From the standpoint of the developer, it's showing progress to the seller because oftentimes there's a contract in place that has timelines, and the developer doesn't want to have the rug pulled out from under because of going over the timeline. So it shows a measure of good faith and progress. Lenders similarly may want to be kept informed because of the implications with loaning money. The municipality's planning code also spells out some rights that accrue to a developer in connection with a preliminary plan. There are certain vested rights, grandfathered rights in terms of the ability to proceed with construction and completing the project, and those are laid out in the MPC once you have a preliminary plan approval. And while it's rarely done, they're actually, based on a combination of the MPC and the case law, there's an ability of the developer to actually start work under the preliminary plan. But that almost never happens for a variety of reasons. One of them is the developer's proceeding at developer's own risk, and there's always a chance the final plan approval might not be granted. In addition, in this day and age, with the very significant regulation by the Conservation District and the DEP, all the earth moving activities that go on, which is really the first stage of development work on site, that's all based upon the review for the NPDES permit. And at this stage of the game, that's almost never received. In fact, in most cases, it might even be necessarily submitted. So that's how it all works. And with this particular project, what would happen after a preliminary plan approval, should the board grant that approval this evening, is the developer would proceed with submission of a final plan application. And that would then go through its process as well. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you. So the Ridge Farm project is along Cedar Crest Boulevard between Walbert and Huckleberry. We've been talking about it for several years now. At the October 21st Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the preliminary plan, subject to 35 conditions. The resolution you have in front of you has, I believe it's 38 conditions. There are additional conditions on the resolution that are related to legal issues that typically go in at the end of resolutions. I can kind of go through those conditions just briefly. I'll categorize them because there's a lot of them. The first one, a development has to have all the agreements in place. The next few relate to professional review letters. Then we look at outside agency approvals. So that's LVPC, PennDOT, Yeah, and then we get into probably the biggest section is related to right-of-way dedications and street dedications. So that's like 14 through mid-20s. And then we get into easement issues. So these are all conditions that are relatively typical for any subdivision approval. There are some specific conditions that I wanted to highlight that are some of the issues and things that we were concerned with at the Planning Commission. There was a concern with the access at Buckman and Dawes Street and whether they had rights to that access. Condition 28 specifically addresses that, so that there's a condition in there that if they don't have that access, don't meet that condition. Another issue that we had was related to phase 2, and phase 2 is at the top of the hill. There's an issue with getting water to the top of the hill. So there's a transmission main that has to come in from the reservoir tank. So that issue, condition 31 states that that has to be in or secured before they can start on phase 2. The other thing we were really concerned with was the potential for the project to fall apart, and then what happens. So if you look at condition 32, it requires the developer or the applicant to have the remaining properties in perpetual open space until the final plan is approved. So what that does is the TND overlay is contingent on open space. So if that open space isn't there, it's not consistent with the TND. So that condition is in there to protect the township to get the TND. So those are some of the big conditions that I wanted to highlight for the board and the public as well. With that, I will hand it over to the applicant, and staff's here to answer questions if there are any after the applicant's done.
Thank you, Dave. Welcome.
Good evening, Jim Preston on behalf of the applicant. I hadn't really planned on making a presentation because as Dave said, this has been in here for a couple of years. Your planning commission has spent some time with this and recommended the conditional approval. Just a couple of comments. There seems to be a lot of conditions. That's probably more of a testament to the diligence of your staff than it is to the quality of the plan. The plan is pretty far along for a preliminary plan, but your staff and in particular your legal department has put this in a pretty tight box as far as how this will proceed from here. And we appreciate that. We don't resent that. The comment about the open space is a good example. So as we proceed through the project, let's say we do a phase 1, as you know, the project, the densities, the placements and so forth come out of a TND ordinance. The TND ordinance is designed to preserve certain areas as open space. So if you think about it, someone could come in and do a phase project, grab all the stuff off the shelves in the first few phases to build that out, and then abandon the rest of the project. And then develop it, another developer could take that over and develop it some other way. That can no longer happen. What's happening here is that as we come in with different phases, the balance of the project is put in a conservation easement, more or less, in perpetuity. And it will stay that way unless until we come in with a subsequent preliminary plan, final plan, in accordance with the agreed upon preliminary plan. We can only move within the confines of the preliminary plan. We cannot move outside those confines. We cannot water down the TND standards over time. That's all in there. That's all preserved and protected. I just say that because there's a lot of those types of conditions in there, which accounts, I think, for the number of conditions. There's if you look up in front, I don't have in front of me the conditions, I think 2 through 6 or so, just deal with the review letters that you would normally expect to see. That's pretty much what we typically expect to see. The rest of it is is good work by your staff. Now, out of respect for the board, we do have you all, Jason, you remember Jason, that's our engineer. He's here to answer any questions you may have. We've got Rob Hoffman here for traffic. If you have any questions, I'll answer any questions that you might have. We hadn't planned on making a presentation, but we're here. If there's anything you need, just let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Preston. Are there any questions or comments from the board on this particular resolution for preliminary approval?
I just have a few questions, and these may be more like status type questions than. Well, let me ask it. You tell me who's the right person. So, and look through the packages. I'm not sure I saw. I know there's different phases. Is there documentation in the package, like a drawing that shows the phases? I've heard the medical building on the corner is in the first phase, as an example.
Yes, yeah, there's a phasing plan that's in the plan set. It's really two larger component phases, phase one at the lower end of the hill, phase two above. It's broken up into sub areas.
Okay.
Not the number specifically off the top of my head. If you look at the first page, it'll tell you what sheet number. But the anticipated, yeah, the anticipated first phase would be phase 1A, which is the medical office, the streetscape along Walbert and Cedar Crest, to the gateway, to the project and to the township. That's the initial piece.
Right. Okay. Thank you. You guys can continue, and I'll just continue. So again, this is general information. I'm not sure. I know this is a matter between K Builders and PennDOT, more so than with the township's involvement. But I'm aware from previous meetings, K Builders and PennDOT have agreed I'll call it the road improvement scope, and then probably the timing. So, and that's been defined a long time ago, right? Maybe nearly 2 years ago.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So that's defined. Now, way back then, I was asking, does the township have documentation of that PennDOT road improvement plan, even despite the fact that we may not be party to it, but it's between K Builders and PennDOT, but certainly the township needs some awareness about that.
I'll let Rob speak to it. He's the traffic engineer.
Yes, so the scope of the improvements, the offsite roadway improvements, they're all identified in the traffic impact study, which has been approved, as you said,
Right.
about a year and a half, 2 years ago, that's been approved. So that's kind of the basis that outlines that scope of improvements. And go ahead, yeah, looks like.
You've actually presented it at these meetings.
Correct.
My main question is very simple. Does the township have a copy of it? I guess that would be Greg, between you and Greg. Do we actually have a copy of what those improvements, the agreed improvements are?
Yes, so you have that.
Okay.
You have that through the traffic study, and then you also have that through the roadway improvement plans, which were several iterations into that, and the township gets copied on that continuously as those go in.
Okay. And then keeping with that then, what about the timing? This is a big citizen question.
Sure.
Let's say before you start moving ahead with even the phase one, the medical building.
Right.
Do PennDOT road improvements on Cedar Crest and Walbert have to be done in advance of that?
So there will be the exact, it's going to be phased obviously because of the size of the project and the magnitude of the road improvements that go in. So it's going to be phased with PennDOT. Exactly what that phasing looks like, we're not 100% there yet with PennDOT. They'll obviously make that final determination. but they will look at, you know, as when phase one comes on, so you're talking about the medical building, they're going to look at that and say, okay, what level of infrastructure improvements need to be in place to support that? So that's kind of getting ironed out now currently as we're working through them with the design, because we're starting to work through the traffic control that's going to be put in place in conjunction with those improvements. And that's going to kind of define that phasing. Now, with respect to that, what I can tell you is it's not going to be drawn out over multiple, you know, ongoing phases of construction. I can say fairly confidently at tops, PennDOT's probably going to lock us down to 3 phases of road improvements. Now, exactly what they look like, you know, it could be a phase that, and this is again not locked down, but I'm going to give you an example of what could happen. They may look at Walbert Avenue as a whole, that corridor, and say, okay, we want all of Walbert Avenue end to end, what you're doing improvements done. And then in conjunction with that, the improvements that focus around the Cedar Crest Boulevard intersection, we want that to get done and in place. And then, you know, phase 2 may be moving from there up the hill, from the hill up through Huckleberry, could be phase 2. And then phase 3 may be the balance of the work going down Cedar Crest to Route 22. And that's, again, we're not locking that phasing, but that's kind of what we're envisioning is where this is going. Now, exactly what that looks like at the end of the day, that'll be part of the permit that comes out from PennDOT.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Rob. So one item, I bring it up, especially on behalf of the resident at this exact location. The south end of Guth Road, I think it's designated to become a cul-de-sac.
Correct.
So there's no ability to travel from Huckleberry onto the south end of Guth Road and vice versa.
Correct.
That's still correct, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that actually part of Ridge Farms, or is that like outside Ridge Farms, but it's just a matter that needed to be addressed?
So Ridge Farm actually owns the parcel that's on the corner, on the northeast corner of the Huckleberry Cedar Crest project. So that's a parcel that they own along that corner.
Okay. That must be like adjacent to the large house that's there then.
Yes, across the street.
Right. Okay.
So closer to Cedar Crest.
All right. And do you turn that into a cul-de-sac, or is that PennDOT who does that, or the township's not doing it, right?
No. That improvement, just like any of the other improvements, will be done by a contractor hired by K Builders to do that. So that's all.
Okay.
And that's all obviously on their dime, as are all the road improvements.
Okay. I'm sure it's in this package. I know earlier in some of the earlier reviews, the stormwater management was an issue that needed to be addressed. So I'll just ask between Tony, I guess representing the other engineers as well, and your team, have all those issues been addressed? What's been addressed versus what is still designated to be addressed in later phases of the development?
So as we spoke, this is a preliminary plan. So we check through all of the management of the water. So the amount of water created from the development and its eventual discharge location. So the water that has to get down Cedar Crest, down at all different points of that it leaves the site. Those have been addressed. We've been through 5 to 6 iterations with the stormwater management report to check that. Open items are mainly the specifics. So checking the specific top elevations of structures and profiles will be something that we will do in final phases. Normally what happens is in an overall plan, we have overall grading that shows that the site will work. There'll be fine-tuned grading as a medical office building comes in, things like that. Those are items we always check. The other item that is specific to a phasing plan that we check, that we put a lot of effort into, is that noting that this first phase will be at the bottom of the hill, it's how will this work with the surrounding development? There's going to be off-site water running to this site, running around this site. So we check to make sure that in each phase, if for some reason either the developer stops for a day or if they stop for 2 years, that all the water will be managed from that specific phase, as if they walk away, there'll be no problems downstream or to any of the neighboring residential, well, any of the neighbors actually residential commercial.
Okay, thank you. All right, thanks a lot.
Any other questions from the board?
Go ahead, no,
Go ahead, Diane.
Diana.
I just had a question, excuse me, on page 1 of our packet, there's just regarding the previous township consideration that there were 35 conditions added. It says that the applicant has addressed one of those. Can someone please speak to which of the conditions has been met, and has it been removed from the list that the planning commission put forward, or is it still contained within?
The condition was a clean plan, and that has been met. So it was removed from the resolution condition.
Thank you. My second question has to do with the status of the easement. I know that there was an issue, I'm sorry, an open issue with the easement with the city of Allentown and the LCA. Has there been any update on where we are with that particular item?
Not since the last time that I spoke to the planning commission, and the reason for that is the city of Allentown has not yet received its audit. Where this is positioned is the city has agreed, LCA has agreed to allow the easement over its property. In fact, they actually appreciate it. The city of Allentown is the owner of the property. LCA is the tenant. Allentown as the owner has likewise agreed. They have a procedure they need to go through. We did provide, they needed an audit, or I'm sorry, an appraisal of the property, which we provided. They want to do their own appraisal, which is fine with us. And as soon as they get those results, then they'll make the recommendation to the mayor to sign off on that. They haven't gotten that appraisal back yet.
And I would just note with respect to that particular issue, Commissioner Kelly, condition 28 in the list of conditions on page 5 addresses this specific concern of the township, and have every expectation the developer is tied up pretty tightly to make sure that they do what's necessary.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have for right now.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sutton.
It's not a question, but last time the applicant was here, I suggested to increase the vegetation on the west side of Cedar Crest Boulevard to be similar to the east side of the east side of Cedar Crest Boulevard, just for aesthetically to make it look a little bit better. The plan was on the west side was a lot less than the east side. Started just wanted to find out if you had a thought on that.
Well, we've agreed to that, and I think it's been captured in one of these conditions. I remember reading it in here. It's in here somewhere. I was just trying to find it. Is that what it is? Yeah, I remember seeing it in here. We have agreed to that. In fact, we thought that was a good idea. Let's see. Oh, yeah, the applicant shall provide to the satisfaction of the township a visual and noise buffer between Cedar Crest Boulevard and the single-family homes west of Cedar Crest Boulevard. They shall place the buffer within a buffer easement, place the responsibility of the maintenance of the buffer to the satisfaction of the township, to the homeowners association, and guarantee the township the right but not the obligation to maintain the buffer at the expense of the homeowners association. I believe that's what you're talking about. Yep, we've agreed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just from a process standpoint, so the next step after preliminary is the final approval, correct, or no?
The next step would be submission of the preliminary plan application, which would be, as I heard from the developer, for phase 1 or phase 1A. That would get reviewed by the planning commission. It'd be a final plan application. And eventually, in working through the engineering details, the staff reviews, at some point, that will be presumably recommended by the planning commission to this board for consideration. That would be the process. And when that process concludes, I guess really depends upon the reviews and the number of back and forth attempts at issues raised in review letters.
Any other questions from the board? Any questions from the public? We have a few. Sir, come on up. We just need to get your name and address, just for the
My name is
record.
Don Sheetsley. I live at 1411 Hampton Road.
Welcome, Don.
So I've attended all the meetings dealing with the Premier Hotel. And so this is my first time here. I'm concerned about the amount of traffic that this will generate and how it relates to Premier Hotel and coming down Walbert, Cedar Crest, the whole thing. Is it? So if it did 2 years ago, they're going to relook at it now, knowing that there may be 3,500 trips a day from the Premier Hotel. Which is my question.
I'll open it up for the,
So there's a process that we follow and we don't go backwards. So this project started well in advance of the Premier Hotel project. So what happens is that's a separate project that comes online after this project. This project is well into its approval phase. So we don't go back and we're just the way the regulations exist, we're not obligated to go back and account for some development that comes online after our project has moved through certain approval phases. So it's not addressed. Now, what will happen with the Premier Hotel, that would have to account for the Ridge Farm traffic because that project comes after Ridge Farm. So that would be baked into that equation, if you will.
Because when we had the Premier Hotel, right, I'm still concerned because I go down Bulldog Road and Ridgeview, that was rated an F, but we still never came up with a plan to fix it. And does this just make it even worse? Right, so that when you did the Premier traffic, did you look at all this traffic that you're going to be adding from Ridge Farms? And was that taken into consideration?
I think he answered, I think he said yes, that was taken into consideration. Am I, yes.
Because I don't remember that being specific. And when we went to all the presentation, I don't remember it said this is how many trips you'll have a day. You have 3,500 trips a day out of Premier. How many will be on Ridge Farm? I don't think that was just a generic number, or the warehouse up north was a generic number. I just think it's really a big deal, the amount of traffic this will generate. You have Cedar Crest on Walburn Avenue and take all this other traffic that'll be coming up, probably Parkland over or up to Winchester and over. It's just a lot of traffic in the next year or two. I'm just making sure that we don't make a mistake.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Ma'am, there was one in the back there.
My name's Sharon Holden. I live at 1909 Walbert Avenue. This question is primarily for the board. I want to know who makes sure when they say that they have to abide by all these rules and regulations that is actually fulfilled and done. Now, I was here when they were going for the Quick Mart, which is next door to my property, and they said that their lights could not shine off the property, and they still light up my whole house every night. I was here when they said they had to put sidewalks on Dollar General. It's been 16 months, and the sidewalk is still tore up. We cannot even walk down it. And is this project going to be the same with the town? Who's going to follow through to make sure these things are done in a timely manner? They haven't in the past.
Well, I'll defer to staff on that, on the procedure for following through with all the conditions and.
In general terms, the conditions have to be met before a CO is issued. Sometimes conditions, not necessarily conditions of this approval, but specific conditions of a final plan approval, sometimes they may get rolled into a conditional CO, so certificate of occupancy. But in general terms, we don't sign off on a project until everything's completed and conditions are met. That includes with the township engineer reviewing PennDOT improvements and making sure PennDOT has their sign-offs. So there's a big, long process that we go through on every development that we look at to make sure conditions are met. And that's done at the staff level.
Very good. Thank you, Dave. We have another question. Mr. Hodges.
Excuse me, Robert Hodges, 1707 Penn's Crossing. Just want to get a basic idea if everything, let's say the process goes through smoothly with all the different preliminary and final, what's the time frame when this would start? A general ballpark.
Jason, you got to come up to the mic. I'm sorry. They can't hear you on our Zoom if you're not at the mic.
So, the project itself is likely to be a 10-year build. The exact start date, we're not sure. Again, the phase 1A is anticipated, I'm sure, to start next year. What the timing of that would be, I'm not sure I can answer that yet. It relies on a number of outside permits that we're aggressively pursuing, but we have to wait to see how that works out.
Thank you, Jason. We have another question in the back.
Donald Holden, 1909 Walbert Avenue. My wife asked a question about the Dollar General, why after 16 months it's still been the way it is. He answered that where they're supposed to have everything done with the CO, unless it was, you said guaranteed. So what happened there? Did you issue a CO with the thing?
So can I make just a suggestion with this so we don't get off topic? So now we're on Dollar General. So if it's okay with you, sir, so we can finish this topic, we can hit on that at courtesy of the floor.
Yes, that's fine.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions on this particular topic? Any in the chat, Dave?
So the question was, they thought there was a connecting road between Huckleberry and Walbert. There is it's called a mobility easement, and it goes up the hill. Generally from the bottom to the top is where that mobility easement. It'll be open to emergency vehicles, and then there will also be a pedestrian walkway in that easement area.
Thank you, Dave.
Why don't we hear anybody?
Well,
All right, I'm gonna go get this stuff done and I'm gonna get washed up.
Read that quick.
The other question that Cindy had was related to Dawes and Filbert Street, whether there would be any consideration or what, if that was considered.
consideration of
There must be somebody in the feed.
I think that Dawes is what the township refers, is the township name for the LCA easement. Is that right? Okay, when she says Dawes, I think Dawes is township shorthand for the LCA. That's not a traffic generator, that's an emergency access road. So I don't know that that would be included, and I don't know what the other question was.
Any other questions, Dave?
Buckman was always anticipated to be a connector to the development, which if you think about it, is how it ended up in being one of the conditions, because that was used to calculate TND density, access, and so forth. It was all part of the equation. So there was no way that we could really avoid it, which is why it explains some of the machinations we went through with respect to getting the rights to go over Buckman to get out that way. But we now have those. So yes, that's always been part of it. That's not an add-on. That was always a part of the project.
Any other questions, Dave? Very good, thank you. So with no other questions then, do I hear a motion granting preliminary approval to a major plan entitled Ridge Farm?
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Long. Do I hear a second? Second from Commissioner Seton. Can I have a roll call vote, please? Randy?
Commissioner Walk? Aye. Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Seton?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Aye.
And Commissioner Morgan?
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good evening. All right. Next this evening, for consideration and possible action, we have a resolution extending a conditional offer of employment for entry-level position of patrol officer in the Township's Police Department to applicants number 78314, number 62339, and number 44406. Conditioned upon individual satisfactory.
We had 2 fire calls.
Okay.
Okay. Conditioned upon the individual satisfactorily completing the background investigation, polygraph examination, medical examination, and psychological examination to confirm their fitness for duty. Chief Dorney.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. This is just a process element, very similar to the exact same thing we did at the last meeting, requesting permission to offer conditional offers of employment for those candidates number 78314, 62339, and 44406. Again, this does not employ them. It just allows us to initiate the background investigation and process to get somebody hired for a final hire. You know that we went through 3 numbers and candidates previously. 2 of those individuals have withdrawn their name because they were offered employment elsewhere, and one of them did not proceed further in the background investigation due to cause. So we're looking to start the process again. As you know, this is a very timely situation for us with the consortium test, and it's a very competitive field with very, very few candidates. So I'm requesting permission to start this process for the next 3 with the hopes that we may get one.
Excellent, Chief. Thanks, Chief Dorney. Were there any questions from the board on this resolution for consideration this evening?
I just want to make sure I understood you correctly. So this is the exact same process, the other 3 that we approved about a month ago?
Correct. The 3 of those from last time are all out of the process.
Okay, so we're just starting fresh.
Yeah,
Okay,
starting
thank
fresh.
you for clarifying.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Any from the public? Any in the chat? None? All right. Do I hear a motion then to move forward with the conditional offer for the applicants previously named for consideration?
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second from Commissioner Walk. Can I have a roll call vote, please, Randy?
Sure. Commissioner Walk,
Aye.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Seton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Aye.
and Commissioner Morgan.
Yes, motion carries. Thank you, Chief. Good luck. All right. Next this evening, we have correspondence and information items. First on the list is our boards and commissions informational items. I'd like to note that we've exciting news. The LVPC is involved in a task force workshop. I'll let Dave maybe go into a little more detail on this. And finally, after many, many years, is putting together a group for consideration on changes to the municipality's planning code. This is much needed. It's a very antiquated code, which does not give much flexibility during the development process to townships and municipalities. And some of the topics that they're looking for through this group is to outline the challenges of the MPC, develop a single legislative platform, and then develop an advocacy strategy moving forward. So it's very, very exciting to see this finally happening within our area. I know our very own Mr. Dave Manhart was involved in some of those discussions representing the township. And Dave, did you have anything else you wanted to add to that meeting? There'll be further workshops and work groups that are going to be available with more information to come, but we're taking the first steps to making some much needed changes to the MPC.
I think the biggest takeaway and the most important piece of that is the fact that as a region, they're tackling the issue and trying to get a unified voice to lobby for changes with the MPC. So it's from both counties, representatives from both counties were involved in recommendations and looking at it, some of the identifiable things that can perhaps be done immediately and then without doing a full overhaul, which would take years and unlikely not to occur. So it's encouraging to see that the LVPC is leading this charge and trying to get a unified voice for our.
Yeah, absolutely. The LVPC has the experience and the resources certainly to gather as much information from both Northampton County and Lehigh County to do that regional approach for those much needed changes. So looking forward to more information on that moving forward. I think that will open up a lot of opportunities for communities to have a better working relationship for developments moving forward. So great. So I also wanted to mention that on Monday, November 8th, we will have a Park and Recreation Board meeting at 7 p.m. On Wednesday, November 10th, the Civil Service Commission will meet at 1 p.m. On Wednesday, November 10th as well, we'll have an additional budget workshop meeting, session meeting at 6 p.m. And then on Thursday, November 11th, would be the continuation of the BOC conditional use hearing, Premier Century Center Luxury Apartments at 6 p.m. That's if needed. That's to be determined. And then also we have that date scheduled in case we need to have another public meeting on that one. So you'll hear more on that if it's needed. And lastly, on Monday, November 15th, we have our Green Advisory Council at 6 p.m. I'd also like to remind the public that our vacancies and boards on our Civil Service Commission, we still have one vacancy and as an alternate position. Our Landscape Shade Tree Commission has 2 vacancies. Our Park and Rec Board has 1 vacancy, and our Zoning Hearing Board has 1 vacancy and an alternate position. So the board, the BOC, has been pretty tied up with meetings lately, as you can imagine. with the budget. So we will be starting interviews hopefully here in the near future to fill some of those vacancies. We do have a list of applicants, but if you know anybody else who's interested, please make sure and spread the word and get their applications in for consideration. So with that being said, does anybody else have anything for board and commission informational items? All right. So I think I mentioned that you have a couple other dates on here. You did. We got those. They're all good. Anything else, Randy, on those? All right, great. We have nothing this evening under direction and discussion items. So Randy, I'll move right to you. Is there any updates on Ware's Dam status at this point?
Nothing to update tonight on Ware's Dam. We're still waiting to hear from our grant application as well as our permit application at DEP. So nothing to report tonight.
Great. Any questions from the public? Mr. Burke? Can you just come to the mic, please? Thank you.
Clarification on the Premier Center meetings. My understanding is the meetings or the hearings have concluded, and November the 11th, is that still the date to have the vote on the meetings?
Perhaps I could address that.
Absolutely.
Ms. Burke, you're absolutely correct. The technical hearings have concluded. And so if there's a meeting on the 11th, it'll be a meeting, not technically a hearing. And whether that occurs or not will really depend upon the Board of Commissioners. If they are complete with their deliberations and feel that they're in a position to vote, they could elect to have that occur on November 11th. That'll be up to the board. If they're not yet ready to vote, or if they decide to do it at a regular public meeting, that would be the option of the board as well.
But would the option to have it at a regular public meeting, would that be advertised well in advance so citizens would be aware of the meeting occurring? As you know, there's quite an interest in this.
Yes,
and
sir.
It would be nice to have at least, a week or at least 5 days notice so that people can put it on their calendars.
Understood. It's in the control of the board. I would strongly suspect that the advertising that staff can do and the board wishes will occur. So I would think that newspaper, website, social media would be the norm. It will, if it's at a regular public meeting and not on the 11th, it would appear on the agenda as well. And while I can't speak for the board, my suspicion is it will be either the 11th or the meeting 2 weeks from tonight. But that's up to the board.
The 11th or the 15th?
17th.
17th. Yes.
That's my suspicion, but that's assuming the board gets through its deliberations.
Right. So the board on the 11th would actually convene just to have the vote.
That would be the only purpose of the meeting. But given that it is actually a public meeting following the vote on that matter, there would be courtesy of floor on other items just because it's a meeting.
Right. Okay. And a question on process. In previous meetings, such as Ridge Farms and the Hillview zoning change meeting, the process was the individuals on the board would cast their vote and state the reason for their vote. Is that correct? It wouldn't just be, I vote deny or I vote yes.
That's a matter that I'll be talking about with the board in executive session.
So it's not clear. So it's possible that on the 11th, if that's when the meeting occurs, people would come to the meeting, hear yes, yes, no, no, yes, or whatever, and nothing else.
That is a possibility, but it's not my call to make at this moment.
Okay. Hopefully the board's decision will be to actually provide explanations, because there are a lot of people interested in this and they're interested in knowing why the particular commissioners would vote in the way they did. I would think that would be the transparency that you would want to provide to the citizens. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah. All right. So next, for consideration this evening, we have our October 20th, 2021 Board of Commissioner meeting minutes. Are there any questions or comments from the board on said meeting minutes?
Commissioner Morgan, I would ask that we table the minutes. I did speak with staff today for a couple of corrections, and I was not able to review the meeting minutes. They were just sent later this afternoon. So could we table them and review them at the next meeting to give me time to review?
I'm fine with that. Very good. Yep, no problem. So we'll make a,
Motion to review.
yeah, we'll make a
Table?
motion to table the meeting minutes until the next meeting.
So moved.
Motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly,
Second.
second from Commissioner Seton. Roll call vote, please, Randy.
Commissioner Walk,
Aye.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Seton,
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly,
Aye.
and Commissioner Morgan.
Yes, motion carries. So at this point, it's now time for courtesy of the floor on any non-agenda item. I know there was a gentleman who had the question on Dollar General. But was that rectified? Oh, great. Thank you, Greg. Much appreciated. I hated to have him wait, but we were off topic, but thank you for doing that. Much appreciated. Anybody else this evening for courtesy of the floor? Anything in the chat?
Commissioner Morgan, before you move on, there was a resident who questioned at the last meeting about the yard waste only being open on Saturdays and asked if there could be consideration to open it during the week since residents are, still cleaning up their yards. And we were going to get back to them on that. Has there been any decisions made by the township if we would be willing to open?
No formal decisions at this point. It's something has already previously been advertised in our newsletter as well as our website that when we switch over to the fall and winter hours, we move to Saturdays only. That's something we'd have to work out with our public works team and to see if we can adjust schedules during leaf collection and everything else that we're in the process of right now.
Thank you.
I think it's something we can look at.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And one other question, the budget meeting that we have coming up, are we going to live stream that? Because I know we haven't been doing that, but since we've got everything working now, can we go ahead and?
We are not set up to live stream in the room we typically participate in. That's all coming through this camera in the center of the public meeting room here. So we would have to, I'm not sure how we would do that.
I mean, could we just hold the meeting in this room and?
We do it in here.
Because it's our final budget wrap up and I know we haven't done that with the other one.
It doesn't matter to me.
I mean, I think it would be a good idea. Just continuity with our meetings.
We'd have to, let's talk about the room configuration to see what would be the most appropriate setup for something like that.
Maybe just feedback to the board and let us know what's feasible and what's not, and we'll do what we can to accommodate. Okay.
Will do.
Any other questions or comments courtesy of the floor? All right. Our invoices and purchasing requisitions have been reviewed by our township manager and our director of finance. Do I hear a motion to authorize that our checks be issued to pay our bills as tabulated?
So moved.
We have a motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second?
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Walk. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Walk?
Aye.
Commissioner Long?
Yes.
Commissioner Seton?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelly?
Aye.
And Commissioner Morgan?
Yes, motion carries. We have no executive session planned. I do need a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Motion by Commissioner Kelly. Do I hear a second? Second by Commissioner Seton. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Have a lovely evening, everybody.